I always used to say to Ken Bruce, I would often see Ken coming out of the building as I was going in, and I said, how was the show? And Ken had a particular way of working, which was, it was great, and on to the next one,
Yeah.
And I thought that was absolutely the right attitude. So I think, how was the show today? I think it was fine, the music was good, and the confession was funny, and the drama was good. So I think, and I didn't mess anything up. The timings were okay.
Good. I mean, if you're finding the confession funny, that must be good, because you've done so many of them.
I have done quite a few. Yeah,
the bar must be high.
Yeah, no, it was a good one today. Yeah.
So it's been 16 months of your new show on Greatest Hits Radio. Do you feel like you've fully settled in there now?
Yes, I do. We started off in the studios in Camden, which was just as everyone was coming out of lockdown, just sort of easing out, because Bauer have a studio there, and that was strange because that was still very much everyone wear their mask.
Yeah.
Mark Goodyear, who uses the studio in the morning, would wipe it down. I would leave a note saying I've wiped it down, and then when I finished, I'd wipe it down and leave a note saying I've wiped it down. And then after a while, you kind of think, did I wipe it down? I can't remember I wiped it down. But the best studios are the sort of the stronger studios, because we were asking, the desk that I was operating in Camden was essentially a podcast desk. We were asking it to do an awful lot. Mm-hmm. And so when the opportunity came to move into Golden Square, we took that, because the stronger studios are there with proper faders, none of this kind of artificial
You want
nonsense.
the proper stuff, don't you?
I want a fader that I can feel, and not a fader that's like on an oven hob.
Like a touch screen.
Yeah, touch screen. The touch screen ones are fine and designed by people who've never used them. So
yeah, probably.
Let's have the faders with bits of Lego on the top so you can operate it.
Yeah, they are like Lego, aren't they? I'm sure lots of people here are more than familiar with your show, but for anybody who isn't, or just to sort of enjoy it for a minute or so, we do have a clip of a little montage of your show, Simon.
Oh, really?
Where were we? Oh, yes, I remember.
Mayo, Simon Mayo. Drive time's on and we want to go home.
Okay, so come in, Jules Holland and Prince Buster. Hello.
It's later than you think.
So what is it about drive time, people ask, that you love so much? To which the answer is, I haven't got a clue, but I just love it. 4 o'clock till 7 o'clock. The best time to be on the radio, best time to listen to the radio.
Drive time drama. Action!
There's something afoot here.
So, where are we going to camp tonight? There's that hill up there, but it looks quite rocky.
No. What about this one over here? Mind you, it's pretty deserted.
Well, I think the choice of hill we should go for is that one over there with a small wood on top.
Oh, yes.
Useful. Caller number 1 is Mark. What are you going to go for?
My answer is Give Me Shelter by the Rolling Stones. I googled Ronnie Wood's height.
Yes, and?
He's 5'7" and I'm 6'2". So him standing next to me, he would be a little wood. Yes.
And so therefore, we have Give Me Shelter by the Rolling Stones. Guess what?
The Simon Mayo Drive Time Show.
Mick Jagger, talking about live music, because people haven't been able to go to it, how fantastic to be able to look forward to it again.
We'll certainly enjoy playing Hyde Park. It was such a great gig last time we did it. If the weather's as good as it was last time, it'll be great.
And apparently Keith's given up the fags as well, so there you go. I'm sure it'll be better than 1969.
Yeah, we're singing even better.
Thanks very much for your time.
Bye-bye for now.
This is, it's a factory whistle because obviously it marks the end of every working day. I know Matt has one in his attic.
Yeah.
And it announces the arrival of the 624 dance... That's going to get annoying. The 624 dance floor, which is a dance feature which will happen sometimes at 624. So stand by for some absolute bangers because, ladies and gentlemen, it is 624 dance floor!
Simon Mayo's Confessions.
It is upon the event of my army medical. Anyway, I find the medical practice in a large Victorian house with big bay windows looking out on a very grassy park. There were plenty of people in the park, mostly well-dressed ladies, a steady stream of whom I noticed were following the path that passed about 6 feet from the window. The doctor barked, "Take off your gown." I dropped the rope and adopted the at-ease position. He still didn't look up, and he said, "I'm going to give you a hearing test." What? Oh, I lost count of the number of ladies who now had caught an unexpected eyeful and had no idea why I'd been required to take off my robe for a hearing test. When at last the doctor looked up and exploded, "You've got no clothes on, man!" Wrapped up the medical rather quickly.
Mayo, Simon Mayo, greatest hits radio.
There we go.
The whole point of radio is that you sit in a studio on your own and you do not talk to an audience like this. That's the whole point.
It's such unknown territory for us radio types, isn't it? But I think what you can hear there is the variety of features that you have developed over the years, many of which...
Some familiar features, I think.
Yeah, very familiar. And that you've taken with you to your show on Greatest Hits Radio from your time at the BBC. Was that important to you?
Well, I guess the challenge was, I haven't heard that stuff, so it's taking me a while to recover. The idea was to have it familiar enough for listeners to find again, but also to make it distinctly different from the show that was there before, other than just being an hour longer and with ads. So we had some new features, some of which go back a long way, so it was a combination, and a show evolves as it goes through. And in the normal process, and you discuss what worked, and then you discuss what didn't work, and then the show adapts and changes, and it's different now to how it was 18 months ago. But yes, the point was to keep it as familiar as possible, so that an audience could find it and they go, "Oh yeah, I remember that."
Yeah, totally, that sort of familiarity. Yeah. And you've also brought with you a lot of the team that you worked with at the BBC as well to Greatest Hits Radio. Is that important that you've got the same people around you as well? Or some of the same people?
Yeah, some of the same people. I mean, I think it was... Drive Time is a bit like breakfast in as much as it's very much an atmosphere programme, and I'd worked very well with Matt Williams, doing the sport at Radio 2, and so when I was asked to go back to Drive Time, I thought it'd be nice if we could get back together.
Yeah.
And then we were looking for a producer, and we found Susie Purdy, who I'd worked with at Radio 2 as well. And it all started falling together because we all kind of knew how each other worked. We knew what had gone before. So it needed to be a distinctive Greatest Hits version of what had done before. But yes, it helped to have familiar faces and people who you trusted.
Yeah. How have you found the change from BBC to commercial? Because to me, immediately it jumps out that you've now got to deal with adverts and shorter links and sort of condensing what you were doing as a show on the BBC now for commercial.
Well, the easy way in was going via Scala, which is where I went to start with. The ad breaks were quite short there and weren't that intrusive at all. It all kind of flowed, pretty easily, I thought. So then when you move to pop commercial radio, we have 3 ad breaks which are 4.5 minutes long. So you trail ahead a lot. You build a program that you hope people will think, I know what's coming up in 20 minutes, I know what's coming up in 25 minutes. It just means that the structure and architecture of the show is more important. And it's just a different way of listening. I imagine that it's probably not the best thing to say if there are advertisers who are listening to the podcast. But my guess is that people go, "Oh, the ads are on."
Yeah.
And they go when they do something, and then they come back again when
it's the general assumption, isn't it?
So in terms of constructing the program, I've got used to it. They're sort of points in the clock of the program. You know what is coming, and you know when it's coming. And when you're doing something like All Request Friday, it's actually quite useful to get to that buffer because it means you can take a breath and get ready for the next thing. So to answer your question specifically, it was easier than I thought it was going to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in terms of like building the Drive show in that beginning phase when you knew that you were moving to Greatest Hits Radio, did you have an idea about what you wanted the format to be, how you wanted the show to make people feel? As you've already said, it's a special time of day. People are on their way home typically.
Yeah, I didn't really. When I was asked to do it by this gentleman sitting on the front row, I thought, first of all, okay, that's exciting. I wonder what that balance is. You can't just come on and do exactly the same thing, but equally it has to be familiar. So it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that it was an exciting thing to be asked to do. I felt as though I had more to give in that particular time slot. Mm-hmm. And so it was great to get back in the water and to do it again. So I was excited with the whole brief was exciting, and to be able to assemble a 3-hour program at that time of day was terrific, and I was thrilled to be asked, really.
Did you notice that you had listeners that followed you across because of that familiarity? That must be nice. And still, I was thinking it's kind of tough on the marketing, because as you might have seen, the ads for Greatest Hits have been on the side of buses and on taxis, and there's TV ads and so on. And we get loads of emails every week saying, I found you by mistake. I found you by accident. I think, okay, great. But sure, people are finding it all the time, I think. So, yes, absolutely, people are saying, I'm very aware that Helen Thomas is sitting on the front row now. So I'm just going to look. Maybe let's just drown them out a little bit.
It's like it was staged. It's like it's
we didn't want to make it easy for you.
No. So the answer to your question is yes. Just anecdotally, it appears as though there are quite a few people who were listening in the past and have found us again, and are happy to have found us.
And do you feel like any of the features that you do or any of the content on the show has evolved in the 16 months that you've been doing it on air for?
Yes, I mean, the drive time drama that we do, I mean, the thing is, context is everything. When you play clips like that, if you hear the last minute of a confession, you need to know what happened beforehand. So the confession is, to be honest, exactly the same. Phil McGarvey at the back there would read, at Radio 2, he'd read, how many was it a week, Phil? Like 20 or something?
Yeah, I'm going to say 70, just for
Okay. Phil would read about 15 a week, and then he'd send me, he'd get rid of the dross, and then would send me the ones that he thought would work, and then I'd fiddle around with them and then send them back, so that was and that's exactly the way it works, because there isn't any other way of working that feature.
I mean, if it's not broken, don't fix it.
Yeah, and the drama started life back in breakfast show days at Radio 1 when it was called the Identikit Quiz. So we kind of rebranded it and changed it and evolved it, and it's more of a kind of a theatrical thing. So it's changed, but it hasn't changed a lot, I would say. I mean, the teacher feature is new, which is, it's a very straightforward feature, which is basically talking about teachers and schools, just because it felt like the right time to be doing it at 4:20.
Yeah.
So that was new, but then I'm thinking, when I was on breakfast, we did a school report feature at 7:45. So, and used exactly the same music. So, so yes, I'm rehashing everything. That's the honest answer.
It's nice to rehash things. It happens so often in radio. And I think do you ever get to a point where you feel like a feature might have run its course, or maybe needs to evolve, or needs to be changed slightly?
Sure. I mean, the feature is only as good as and is fine until someone thinks of a better idea, in which case you ditch that idea and you go with a new one. Yeah. The thing with the Confessions is that we ran it for a number of years, then it went on to the television, and the people who listened to it first time round, who were going to school listening in their now have kids of their own, and they're sending people keep on doing stupid things, so they keep on sending stories. Yeah. So as long as they're still funny and we don't get sued, then we'll carry on doing it. But if someone on the team thinks of a better idea tomorrow, we'll junk it and move on.
Yeah, I mean, clearly it's a good idea because it's become a book, it's become a podcast, it's become so much bigger than just a feature on the radio.
Yeah, 4 books actually. But
4 books. You're right to correct me on that.
No, but basically it's just like, tell me something embarrassing that you've done. I mean, that kind of feature can run forever.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, when you're looking for audience engagement, you want people to bring to the table something that's going to amuse others, really. So it's a great feature.
Yeah, exactly. So there are, yeah, the show's exactly the same. Is that where you wanted to get to? Yes, I think.
But it's also evolved in
it
certain ways,
evolved,
and you have adverts now.
It's evolved in a way that's still very, very similar and familiar to everybody.
Do you have ambitions or things that you still want to do with the show, that you things in the pipeline that will be coming up?
I think there are things in the Greatest Hits pipeline which are very exciting. I think one of the things that I always thought Chris Evans did fantastically well on Breakfast. I haven't listened for a while, but when I imagine he's doing the same. He's doing the Chris shtick, and one of the things that he was absolutely brilliant at is making a Tuesday in November thrilling. Mm-hmm. And that seems and we've all done memorable programs and highlights, maybe it's with a famous guest or done an outside broadcast that went well or whatever. But the real trick, if you're doing 5 days a week, is to make every single show as fantastic as possible. Mm-hmm. So that on that rainy Tuesday in November, that people feel better having listened to your program than they did when they switched it on. So I think of it like that. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure whether it does or not. But I think it's making every program as, even though it's an ordinary day, making it as fantastic and polished and funny and full of great music as possible. Mm-hmm. And then people will go, oh, I've completed my car journey, or I've finished my shopping, or I've done whatever. I feel better now.
Yeah. One of the other points that's quite clear from this conversation and the people in this room is the contacts that you've made through your career along the way, the people that you have around you on your show, the friendships on air that become so much more than a feature. And one of the first episodes that we had on the Radio Academy podcast was Jackie Brambles, and she was very, very sweet about you on the podcast and talked about how you brought her into Greatest Hits Radio. And it just struck a chord with me because it made me think, this is an amazing industry. The people we meet do become lifelong friends, and there's that opportunity for collaboration the whole way through our careers.
Yes, Jackie just seemed to me an obvious hire. I'd always enjoyed working with Jackie back on Breakfast, Radio 1 days, and she did the early show, so she finished at 6, I think, and then she came on and was part of Breakfast, and she was burning the candle at both ends, and there was one time, and I'm sitting my side of the desk, and Jackie's the other side, and Rod, I think, was sitting next to her. And I could see, and Jackie just started to kind of thought, I'm talking some drivel, and I thought, she's fainting. And she did, and she absolutely, mid-link, she collapsed. When you listen back to the ROT afterwards, you can hear this thud. Oh, no. So you cut to music, let's play a track. And she was just exhausted, she was just exhausted. And Mr. Blacksall here tried to persuade her who was producing at the time, tried to persuade her to get a cab, and she absolutely, you don't persuade Jackie to do anything she doesn't want to do, and she wanted to come back. But she was bright and really into the music and funny. She went to America and she came back and she did Loose Women, and I thought, she'd be great. And we play music from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, so we want people who can be passionate about that. And for all the reasons we're very familiar with, there weren't a lot of women on the radio who were playing that stuff in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Janice Long was on the show when we on the network, and we lost her recently, of course. So I thought we need to get Jackie, and it took a while, but now I'm very pleased that she's on. She's on just after me, so that again, it's that familiarity which radio listeners really like. So I go up to 7, and Jackie's on after 7, and if anyone remembers us from back in the day, then they'll think, okay, I like this.
Yeah, and you obviously have a fondness for that, like those early days of your career when it was fun. It's always fun, but particularly so Radio 1 days, I imagine.
Well, it was quite a big station, yeah. It was, and breakfast 88 to 93, it was, you are just aware that what you're doing makes waves, and you can make records, and we made hits of some really terrible records back then. And some good ones.
You must
as
be
well.
proud of that though, because that's an achievement to have had that influence.
Yeah, well, the Monty Python, Bright Side of Life, and Donald, Where's Your Trousers, and I'm sure that was Rick's idea. I think all the bad stuff I'm going to pass his way. But no, they were heady days, of course. An audience figures that now people would go, "Are you kidding me? Really?" Which is not, media was just less fragmented, so it was no big deal. But no, they were fantastic days. And Radio 1 this is my good fortune, and we all need good fortune. Radio 1 was just going through a big FM switch-on program, and so my presenting of breakfast coincided with all the FM switch-ons, which was very useful for audience figures, obviously. And I have a distinct memory. Does anyone remember that Sabrina? A very bouncy personality, and we did a show in a car park off the M4. It was a motorway service station at 6 a.m, and the pluggers who were working Sabrina had bought. So it's like 7:15 a.m, and Sabrina is singing "Boys, Boys, Boys" in a singlet on a stage at the service station off the M4, and the truckers, everyone was going, "What? Have I fallen asleep? What? So absolutely surreal. They were, I don't know why I picked on Sabrina as being a moment that I remember, but the FM switch-ons were very important. Because Radio 1 had been an AM station like forever. So the FM was this huge liberation.
Yeah, I love these stories from Radio 1 because you wouldn't get that now in a car park on the M4.
No, there are a number of reasons why that wouldn't happen now. That's practicality and common sense and taste and decency are three that I can think of.
But over your career, you've seen the industry change so much, and maybe in some ways not change at all. What would be your advice to people wanting to start out in the radio industry now, sort of geared at the fact that we've just launched our 30 Under 30 and we're hoping to inspire that next generation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm aware that the industry has changed a lot. So the way that I came in, which was through student radio, hospital radio, BBC local radio as a station assistant, then to Radio 1. Some of that still works, but some of that is a whole lot less easy than it used to be. There is also no right way of getting into radio. We've learned a lot over the last 20 years that there are all kinds of ways of finding talent to produce and present radio. So I'm slightly aware that I am, speaking from another generation, particularly if you're talking the under 30s. But the main thing that I'm thinking is, when I started writing books about 12 years ago, the first 3 books that I wrote were all for kids, and I did a lot of talks in primary schools. And primary school kids, they listen to you very politely because you're more interesting than the lesson that they were supposed to have, and then it comes to the question time. And they always ask the same questions. One is, how old are you? The other is, how much do you earn? That's another conversation. And the third one is it going to be a film? And they are the 3 questions. And what was great was, even if the kid next to you had just asked the same question, they were so determined to ask the question that they'd ask exactly the same question. But then usually a teacher would say, what advice would you give to anyone here who wants to write or wants to be an author? And I'd had 1 or 2 books published, so I felt a fraud. But the only advice I felt confident in giving was read. Read as much as you can so that there's an input and output balance, so that the more you have coming in, the more easy it is to come up with something interesting going out again. So, and I think the same is true in radio. So the advice I would give would be to Listen to everything that you can. Don't just listen to the same stuff that you like. Listen to stuff that you think that you don't like. Don't download the same podcast, but if you've never listened to a politics podcast or a history podcast, listen to those. If you've never listened to Scala, if you've never listened to LBC, listen, have an opinion on everything. Be incredible be the most informed person that you can possibly be, because that way the input will be mirrored in some way by your output, because what you want to do, say, produce will make a whole lot more sense. So I think that's the only thing, because the ways into radio has changed so much, so the only thing I would say is listen to as much as possible.
Yeah, and do you see opportunities for paid experiences for people starting out in the industry that exist around you and what you're doing?
No idea.
No.
I don't feel qualified to answer that.
Fair enough. But I mean, in terms of like your experience with student radio and community radio, there's nothing to snub at sort of voluntary experience either, is there? Because that sort of gives you the skills that is going to get you the paid work.
I mean, as long as you're not going to be exploited. I did my way into Radio Nottingham, centre of most great radio in this country, as far as I'm concerned. Me and Trevor think that anyway. Was through Radio Brighton, and I volunteered there, and I put records away. I did any old stuff that they wanted me to do. I was fortunate; I was living with my parents still, so I could do it. And as long as no one is taking the mickey and just assuming you'll work for nothing, volunteer, become irreplaceable. I should say, I did student radio. We have working on our team on the Drive Time show, Great Sis, fantastic woman who is an AP, who's just come out of student radio, mid-20s, and she's one of the best producers I've ever worked with. No disrespect to any producers in this room who I have worked with. She's almost as good as they are. But what I mean is she lives and breathes radio. So that's what I would say. It is possible to work most places. If you live and breathe radio, you can do it.
Yeah, I mean, quite often on this podcast when we speak to guests, the overwhelming thing is that if you're genuinely interested in something and you want to make content around that, people will enjoy it because it will shine through. It will be sincere and genuine.
Yeah, and we can all spot the part-timers. We can all spot the people who really, I don't really know. Okay, do it, and you can spot them. But I think there are producers and management in this room who can spot, as soon as they come in, you would be irreplaceable. You would be fantastic. I need to have you working on the show, and you can make yourself irreplaceable. I think.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any specific advice to people that want to be a presenter? Well, pretty much a version of what I just said in terms of people who want to become a producer, or be a journalist. Or, listen as widely as you possibly can, and not just in the kind of music style that you like. Mm-hmm. Listen to classical music, listen to Jazz FM, listen to all the stations where you wouldn't find as a natural home, and work out what kind of show you would do there and how you would fit in. Mm-hmm. Is there any music that they're playing which actually you could learn from? Mm-hmm. And I think if we're all honest, we're all still learning. Yeah, I think that's a great.
Stay interested, stay inquisitive, stay thinking, that show was fine. You asked me how today's show was fine, but I hope tomorrow's is going to be better.
Yeah. Is there any advice that you've ever been given that's just stayed in your head and you've thought, I'm really glad someone told me that?
Yes, but it's advice that I was told never to pass on.
Oh, go on.
Which is probably by Helen Thomas. No, the advice was always it's easier to apologise than to ask permission. I'm not sure how helpful that is. How helpful is that?
Depends who you're talking to.
It depends who's doing the apologising, I think. Yeah. No, that's the only instant advice that I can think of.
Great. Well, I think it's a good time in which to open up to any questions that you guys have. Is there anyone that would like to ask Simon a question?
Unless I've worked with you.
Yeah, I'll take the microphone over.
Yes. Hello. How old are you and how much do you earn?
I can't remember either.
I have a proper question.
I became a granddad last weekend. That's how old I am. So...
Congratulations.
Thank you. And when you get to that level, it's rude to ask those questions.
Fair enough. I have a proper question, and I guess relates to the kind of movement of time. Greatest hits radio. When is the time to move on from 70s, 80s, and 90s and move past the year 2000?
No idea. Ask Bauer Management, represented down here. For my money, not in the foreseeable future. Why would you? 70s, 80s, and 90s gives you 3 decades of fantastic music. So I'm imagining we'll be there for the foreseeable future. And if there's a Greatest Hits Radio which needs to be the next 3 decades, then we'll have that as a spin-off station as well. But we'll have that. Thank you. But I don't. Yeah, it's an interesting question, but I can't see it. I can't see it being practical for the moment. It also fits quite well for me. Thank you very much. So I'm hoping that the answer is not, because I joined Radio 1 exactly halfway through those 3 decades. So I'm thinking that's fine. Yeah, well, that's fine. It's playing to my specialist subject, so I'm fine.
Thank you, Simon, for that. So I don't know, that's a silly question, but moving stations, and it seems like you move stations with your features. In a way, I thought that shouldn't be in radio, or there should be another way of doing it. But how do you, or what do you think about moving stations with your own features, and you know you're gonna do good radio, and you've been doing good radio, but you're doing it with a different area of expertise?
Well, it's true that I moved stations, and it's that balance which everybody faces on every show. You know, what's good and still has life, what's run its course, and that we ditch and that we move on. And I don't know. There's no easy formula for working out when that point has come to. I tend to. I like to. There's always research which will come along, but I kind of would tend to go with gut instinct, and you kind of think, not sure. Maybe it's time to. I would rather come up with it, sort of be ahead of the research if possible, if at all possible. But it's, in terms of transferring one idea from one station to another, when I went to Scala on the first, I don't know how true this story is, but anyway, on day one, it was the launch of Scala Radio. It was very exciting and terrifying time because my show was the first, so we were launching a radio station. It was very exciting, and somebody at Scala had thought it'd be a really good idea that round about 10:30 to do a quiz called Op Master, based on opera knowledge, and I thought it was an inspired idea, and it lasted one day because word was fed down that lawyers had spoken and management were unhappy anyway.
Talking about lawyers, sorry, Simon. Talking about lawyers, would it be against the law to maybe if you're digging into research and media, would it be against the law to start to move station? You're working for a station, you have a particular thing you're doing, and then you're moving on something special or something, or you're doing. I don't know how to put it in words. Radio people can help me here. In the law, like really laws, talking about courts and stuff like that, is it like, could it end up being against the law for you to move features from station to station, or because everyone is sort of...
It hasn't been so far, is all I can say. And I did Confessions on Scala, I'm doing Confessions now, and the BBC are full of very understanding and lovely people who decide not to kick off, in my experience. But thanks for raising that, like just a few feet in front of Helen, who might not know that I'm doing Confessions again. So if the feature disappears tomorrow, you'll know precisely why, and it'll be your fault. But thanks.
Trouble now. pass them.
Hi Simon, how many hours preparation goes into a typical drive time show, or minutes?
I've got no idea about minutes, but so the heaviest workload. Well, we don't have a lot of guests on the program. I have got one of the Eagles coming on tomorrow, so there's a bit of prep to do with that, and listen to Timothy Schmidt's album. Monday is always the heaviest work day because that confession exchange, which I was mentioning earlier, they all come in on Monday morning or last thing Sunday. So I then read them all, work on them. If they need work, send them back. So that's 2.5 hours on Monday morning working on that. Then you have the script for the day's program, and there'll be 3 or 4 feature records which I want to make a thing about, and so we'll do some work and some research on that. But so it's spread very unevenly across the day. But then if something happens suddenly in the middle of the program, then everything, all bets are off, and you're working harder then than you were beforehand. But the amount of work that goes into music radio, I'm just talking from my point of view, nothing will ever match the amount of work that goes into a 5 Live program. If you're presenting 3 hours on 5 Live, it's a full-time job, and that is, you have no room for anything else. Every single moment is spent reading papers, reading magazines, reading books, watching TV, watching films. But for music presentation, obviously, a lot of the program is taken up by actually playing the music, and so you just need to have stayed on top of enough things to make sure that the way you're going to present them is in, stupid things like always spend 10 minutes every morning looking at a weather map of the country so that you know that it might be fantastic in Southampton and London, but it's actually chucking it down in Aberdeen. And if you assume that the weather is great just because it's great here, then you're going to sound an idiot. So it's sort of little things like that. So it's spread unevenly, but Monday is the heavy work day as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, thanks.
And if I'm doing all request Friday, then there's no work at all. Because all the work is being done with listeners on air when they come on air.
Sorry, there seems to be a bias to row 2, so the rest of the room is welcome. Simon, in your amazing career, all of us who do interviews love that moment of the unexpected, don't we? Where it's something you hadn't planned for, it's emerged in a conversation, we're going to run with that. And I wondered if you had an example of when that had happened to you and what made that special and added to the kind of what makes radio magic.
Well, it's certainly true that I do think all interviews are, certainly long-form interviews are, they're at their best when they're kind of organic and they clearly are going in different directions. I'm old enough to have done the local radio training unit which the BBC had when the Langham was owned by the BBC, and I went on a training unit there, and I remember we did interview training and interview practice and all that kind of stuff, and doing an interview which is up to basic standards really is quite a straightforward thing. 1, do your prep. 2, listen. That's it, in my opinion. So in case you're not getting much out of your interviewee, you've got all the work, you've done all the work you can find, you can structure the interview. But you never know. So maybe very occasionally there'll be a moment where it'll go off at a tangent, and you need to be alert to that moment. That's certainly true. The Dale Winton interview I did, and is one of those where I'm trying to remember what it was that he actually said. He started talking about his personal life in a way that wasn't covered in his book, which he was there to promote. And I knew Dale a bit from Radio Nottingham days. He was at Radio Trent, and so we had a kind of a camaraderie and a rivalry. But I think it goes back in a way to what we were talking about having a flexible team working around you. There was one other. This is kind of answering your question and kind of not. In the studio, Ricky Gervais and the Archbishop of Canterbury. There's a typical 5 Live kind of, again, not planned. It's just that Ricky had a thing to promote, and obviously the Archbishop did. This is Rowan Williams. And and I know that Rowan is a hardcore atheist, and I knew also, because I'd done my research, that the Archbishop of Canterbury wasn't. So, and I thought, is there going to be, what's going to happen here? Is it going to be, Ricky, thank you very much, Rowan, how do you do, nice to meet you. But it looked to me as though there was some interest between, the Rowan was interested in saying hello to Ricky, and Ricky was interested in saying hello to Rowan. And so I'm now running late to the news and sport, so everything is going to get knocked on. But I thought, actually, this sounds quite good. And I think it actually still is on YouTube, because Ricky Gervais and Rowan Atkinson clearly actually respected each other quite a lot. And they wanted to talk and have conversation, which they'd never had at any other stage. But because they respected each other, it was like 5 minutes of Rowan saying why he quite liked Ricky, and Ricky saying why he quite liked the intellectual and academic approach that Rowan Williams was taking to the subject of comedy. So I think it's just, to answer your point, I think it's, some interviews are dynamic and most of them aren't. Most of them, particularly if you're doing a 10-minute or 15-minute promo, tell us about your movie, what are you going to do next? And there's not really much excitement to be had there unless you're dealing with someone like Tom Hanks who can make it interesting. But I guess it's being alert and being aware that sometimes it might go off at a tangent. And that's where the prep needs to come in, because if you haven't done your prep, you might be scared of the tangent that you're going off in. Sorry, that was a long answer.
Has anything ever happened that was just completely outstanding in an interview and you just said, God, wow.
Anything outstanding?
I'm sure all your interviews are outstanding. I meant
that's the caveat I was looking for.
Yeah, okay,
Thank
good.
you.
All right. We've
Presenters.
We've
God.
established the playing field there. No, just something really surprising. You think, I really wasn't expecting that.
I'm sure that there has been. I can't remember off the top of my head an instant moment where apart from swearing, which is kind of boring, really, when you've got a rock band in Fun-Loving Criminals, I think they just came in and they just cursed. Got to the point where I was thinking, we're gonna have to. Literally, it was so bad that we're gonna have to stop I don't know what we're gonna do next, but we're gonna have to stop this interview. And then the drummer in Fun-Loving Criminals, who's English, pointed to the lead singer, who went on to have an established BBC presenting career, said, when the red light's on, your mother's in the room. And he got it. And he went, okay, fine. So nothing that dynamic, but it just occurred.
If there was, hello Simon, if there was one radio station you had to work for a week, or rather would like to work for a week, a radio station you haven't worked at before, what radio station and what show would that be? Maybe a commercial and a BBC answer?
That's a good question. So I've never worked for them before.
Yeah.
And I just have to work there for a week.
Yeah, and you quite like the idea of it as well, preferably.
Okay. Yeah. I think I would like to present the Today programme. And I don't see any reason why not. And I'd like to do an hour on Planet Rock.
Good answer.
That's a bit of a cop-out because Rick can sort that out. And he's almost certainly going to say, we could do that. So that's a cheat. But I think, I don't listen to Andrew Marr on LBC because he's on at the same time as I am. But when I go back and listen to his stuff and watch some of the stuff that they put on, some of the clips they put on social media, I quite like to do that. So I'll do an hour on LBC, Planet Rock, and the Today programme. That's quite good. I quite like that.
Ambitious, yeah. I like it.
And present Newsbeat.
Thank you. Very prestigious.
Absolutely is.
Great. Have we got time for one more question, do you think? Yeah. Yeah.
How are you finding the transition of the film podcast to moving to 5 Live, and is that similar to the transition from BBC to commercial radio?
No, it's a lot. I think it's a lot easier because even though legally it's supposed to be a very different program, it's exactly the same. So it was awkward in as much as you become institutionalized, and I love, I've been a part of 5 Live since 2001, and it's an extraordinary station, and the film show became what it became because of the leeway and the support that it was given at 5 Live. But what was happening was lockdown kind of disguised this. So the film show was recorded and then it was played out on a Friday, so I could still do the live drive time. When everything opened up, it became very difficult because you can't be live on 2 stations at the same time. And Friday was just a nightmare because I recorded an hour and 20 minutes at Greatest Hits, and then I'd do live on 5 Live, and then I'd run from Broadcasting House to Piccadilly it was just, this is ludicrous. So then when it was suggested that maybe there was an alternative, we pursued that alternative. And trying not to say the media horizon has changed, but it has, and you can do podcasts outside of the BBC, and because we'd done 21 years, we kind of had a following, and so, we've only been doing it for a couple of months. I don't know whether it's going to work. I hope it is. The subscriptions look pretty positive at the moment. But it's quite an easy switch because it's exactly the same, I would say. Not exactly the same, obviously, because there are commercials that I have to read. For manscaping, for example, I've got a script just this afternoon which I have to look, and I've already crossed out most of it because it's just ludicrous. But yeah. So thank you for your question. It's been a reassuringly straightforward transition. Kermode is staying at my house tonight because we have to make a very early start tomorrow for the record. So we can share a taxi, which means that Sony can save £25.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think that wraps it all up and comes to an end. I think we covered it all, didn't we? So thank you so much for your time, Simon. Thank you, everyone, for your participation as well. Big round of applause.
Thanks very much.